Hey everybody, DJ here. Welcome back. This is going to be a tutorial on using DaVinci Resolve's Fusion to do a compositing of the fireball simulation that we created using Blender. If you haven't checked that out yet, please do that because that's basically what I'm be using for this tutorial, and you'll be able to basically have it and use it for this. And also, I did a video on how to download and install DaVinci Resolve and use it. So, like some overall basic stuff. So, if you haven't checked that out yet, please take a look at those. Both of those links are going to be down in the video description. Now, let's go ahead and open up DaVinci Resolve. And basically, this is what it looks like. You're going to have all your projects. We're going to make a new project. And we're going to call this Fireball Comp Toot. You can call it whatever you want. Create. And here we go. So, oh, it looks like I spelled fireball wrong. That's fine. So let's go over to media here on the bottom left. You can see that there's a little media icon. And what we're going to do is we need to import our EXR file. So if we right click, go down to import media and navigate to the folder, which I already did, you'll see I have a whole bunch of EXR files in here. And I'll hit Control A to select all of them, click open, and now I have my clip down in the bottom, which I can scrub like this. Really, really neat. And we can play it up here. You can see there it is. But the color looks really weird. Yeah, it looks weird. And that's okay because we're going to fix that in the compositing. So let's go down to the cut right here. And all we're going to do here, we're not going to do a whole bunch of editing in this. This is just a compositing tutorial. So we're just going to left click and drag, place this right down into the timeline. And now we have our clip in the timeline. Awesome. If we go over to the editing tab, there are some things that you could do, like adding a really simple title card or something like that. But again, we're not doing that, and we're not going to be doing any of the compositing effects in here either. We're going to be using Fusion for this. So click on Fusion, and now we have this window open right here. And you can see that it looks a lot similar to other programs, something like Nuke or Natron, which I have a tutorial series on if you'd like to check that out. That is also going to be linked in the video description below. This is a node-based compositing system. This is not like the horrible After Effects by Adobe, which basically still uses the layer-based old 90s version of compositing or older. This is the newest and best way to do compositing, which are nodes, because we can actually see where everything is being piped and what our outputs are, and we can select different outputs as we go for our rendering. So what we're going to do first here is we're going to do a very, very simple color conversion of our file here. And a lot of people are probably not familiar with color space and all that, and that's totally fine. I'm not that great at it either. I just know enough to get me to where I need to be. If you want to check out a lot of videos on color space and color theory, coloring film, all that kind of stuff, check out Tony Day. I will link his YouTube channel in the video description below. He has a whole lot of videos that specifically talk about all this stuff within DaVinci Resolve, and he is very knowledgeable. So let's go ahead, and down here, we're just going to right click. We're going to add a tool. We're going to go to color, and it's going to be this one right here, OCIO color space. Boom, just like that, okay? And I'm going to place this below our media in, like this. And we're going to left click and drag this down into the color space. And what we're going to do is this has a particular method. We can actually move this like this across. If you left click and drag this little middle spot, you can change the way that you're seeing your different media down here, or how it's being composited, and compare the two. So if we look at this and we hover over it, you can see there's these little two dots right here. So let's click on this one here, and you can see that there we have this node, and over here we have this node right here. Now what we can also do is we can check our channels here, and we can change our view. If we go up here, we can change this to 100%, and we can middle click and drag around and take a look at our file like this. Or we can go up here to our channels, and we can look to see if there's an alpha channel, which we do have one for this project. Now, I will probably let this be available for download on my Gumroad, where people can get this animation, EXR animation, and do this without having to do the whole Blender series and rendering this out. But I don't know if I'm going to do that yet. If it is there, you'll see it down in the video description where you can download that. It's probably going to be like $1 plus, but we'll see. So let's change this and let's actually go back to color instead of the alpha, and let's change the color space. So if we go over here to the right, you can see that there's source space, output space, and look. So basically what this is saying, okay, what's the source color space? And currently it's set to raw because a lot of times in DaVinci Resolve, people use this for film. And raw is a source space that a lot of film uses, but this is not for film. This is an EXR, and EXR is a linear source space, okay? And you see that there isn't anything really that's going on right now, but it's basically communicating how to transform our coloring here. So then right here where it says output space, instead of raw, what we need to do is change this to gamma 2.2. And you can see there on the left versus the right, we have a more proper color space with our little smoke effect that's behind there, and the fire and the wall, and you can start to see some of the details here. So if I go like this, you can see that there's some detail there. Okay. So next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to want to replace this transparent background. And that's fairly simple. If we right click, we can add the tool, but if you go over here, you can see that background is right here from this quick shortcut set right here. So if we click on that, we have a background. I'm going to set this for the left, and then this one here, I'm actually going to keep this just like that. And we're just going to move the background up here. Now the background we can make over here in the inspector. We can make this any color we want. We can make it this turquoise color here if we'd like, or a teal color like that. We could, but when I created this particular, let's actually do something here. Let's take this and remove it, and then we'll take the color space here and we'll put that into the media out so it's more correct here. So when I created this simulation, I used a black background for how I wanted to basically preview what the final comp would sort of look like after it was finished. And with the background set to something like a teal, it won't really look as good because we're not going to see this smoke as much, okay? So I'm going to keep this as a black, and I'll show you what happens after we composite it, how this sort of affects that, but let's just put it black for right now. Then what we want to do here is we want to use a merge node. And if you are familiar with my Natron tutorials, you'll notice that the merge node is used a lot. And this is a lot of the things that you're seeing here, these are standards when it comes to compositing. So paint, roto paint, rotoscoping, blurs, adding this color space conversion here. A lot of this stuff is going to be very similar to what you might see in something like Nuke or Natron or another compositing program that's node based. So let's go ahead and add the merge node, which is right here, or you can right click, add tool, and go to composite, merge. And what we'll want to do is take this background one and go from the output and plug it in first. For some reason, if you go in the opposite direction, it kind of like doesn't work right. It tries to put this one over the other one. So for this one here, just take the output, plug it in, and then for this one here, take the output, plug it into the merge node, and let's look at this on the left. You can see that now we have a black background behind the simulation. And if we go back to the background node here and we take this and we change this to a white, you can see that it's really hard to see that fire effect because that's not how I created this asset. So let's go ahead and change this background back to a black color. And don't worry about it being too black. We are going to do some changes to the coloring and everything, but let's now take this and plug in the output from our merge node. And there we have a really nice little composite. So very simple. You could go and finish this up and render this out like this if you'd like, but we're going to do a little bit more here, okay? So the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to add a glow. So if you go down to Resolve FX Light, Glow, click on that, plug this in here, and we're going to put this on the left. So here's the glow, here's the non-glow. You see that there are some issues here. It does seem a little bit blown out, and if we click on the glow map, we can actually go right here, glow alone. So that's the glow map. And then the shiny regions, that's basically the areas that are being used for the glow. We can actually take this and just pick a smaller section like this. Go back to the glow alone, take a look at that. Look at the glowing image or the composite, and then we can start to change a couple things here. So the spread will basically increase the size of the glow like this. You can see how that's happening there. So we can add a little bit like this. HV ratio basically will change it from a stretch vertical or a stretch horizontal. And let's actually, I'm going to take the gain and pump this up a little bit just so I can talk about this. So this sort of effect here is what a lot of people refer to as the anamorphic stretch. So if you look at something like um, The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, or a lot of 80s throwback type of movies, or Steven Spielberg stuff, you'll see this anytime there's a glow or a lens flare or something like that, it seems to be stretching across the entire frame. That's because anamorphic is basically a small cell that's then stretched later, and it takes the glow effect and it stretches it way out like that. So if you want that kind of effect, using the HV ratio here, that's how you can kind of achieve that, is by stretching that out like that. And let's take the gain. I just showed you what the gain does. It basically pops up that value there. And the gamma basically makes the glow more visible. So you can see that there. You want to be kind of careful with this. You don't want to go too far. Saturation you can pull down, or you can pump it up so that it's even more saturated, which looks a little bit weird. We are going to be changing the coloring. Like I said, we're going to be finalizing this. And there's kind of the reason why I made it not so perfect as far as the coloring and the overall definition of all this stuff. We do have a lot of tools that we can use in here to enhance this image. So don't worry about all that kind of stuff. So then down here, what you can actually do is you can take out certain colors. So you can take the red out and make it more of this teal color if you like, kind of like that. You can take the green out, make it more magenta. You can take the blue out and make it more greenish. There's all sorts of things you can do here by changing this color. You can also take this color filter right here. You can click and pick a color that you want it to kind of like reflect as a glow color if you want. Okay, so kind of cool. Really neat stuff you could do with that. I'm just going to put these all, oops, that's too high. Let's put these at 1. Is that what it was? Probably just 1 there. And reflect camera, just keep this selected. If you vignette it, it basically cuts it off at a certain part. Reflecting camera tends to stretch it all the way out to the end of the frame there, so I would do that. Then, of course, your compositing type, which I'm not going to go too much into the math on all this, but basically what this does is it will um, add, subtract, difference, blah, blah, blah. The only thing for glowing that you really want, if you want to really add a proper glow effect, is either add or you can screen it over the top. So if I hit screen, you can see there, I get my detail back in my fire. Okay, so it's just going over the top and it's not blowing out those colors to a unreasonable type of color. So add kind of like adds, it literally will add to that color's like white value. And then screen just kind of puts it over the top and will brighten up the areas that aren't as bright. Okay, so that's basically how that can work. And I'm just going to mess with a couple of these really quick just to kind of make this what I want. And then I can also go to another frame. It's good to check other frames. So you can see as it comes in, there's our lighting effect, our glow effect. You can see it right there. We can turn it on and off right here like that. So you can see there it is. And follow it through and see what that's going to look like. So here it is without, and here it is with. So not too much of a difference, but just enough to brighten up the image and make it look a little bit more cool. So let's now take this out of here and put the glow into the media out. Now, one more thing that we're going to do to this to sort of finalize it is that if we look at this really, really close, let's go 400%. If we look really close at this and we kind of like zoom around, you can see that there's some grain, okay? So there's some graininess to this, and it has to do with the sample count that I used. So, it wasn't super, super high as far as the number of samples and all that kind of stuff. But what tends to happen with VFX and with anything that has very clean graphics, if we zoom out to 100%, anything that has really clean graphics or is a sort of visual effects element or something that was created in, let's say, an Illustrator program that was animated, so it's got some very clean gradations and stuff like that. When you render it out and it becomes compressed into something like either a movie, which I mean, especially if you're putting into a movie, you kind of have to apply what I'm going to talk about next, which is grain. You need to apply the grain over the top of your background, which usually is called a background plate, and your foreground elements. And you'll put a grain over the top of that, usually done by denoising or degraining the plate, and then taking that same noise or grain that was degrained and putting that back over the top with your VFX layers to blend it in. But when it comes to putting something that's clean like this onto something like YouTube, a lot of times your colors become sort of like you see what's called banding. Okay. And banding can occur when there is just too much color information to be handled by a compression of that video footage. And in order to sort of deal with that banding, what you can do is you can add grain over the top. And what the grain does, and I've seen this work on alpha channels where, let's say, you add a glow effect at the end, and the alpha channel of the glow is really rigid, and you can see harsh edges and stuff like that in the final. If you add a grain just on the alpha, sometimes that blends it in. And on a rendering like this, it's possible that there are some banding or some JPEGing or just some issues with the overall color compression because the color gradations are too clean. So what you'll need to do, because we are using, we're in an internet based world and a lot of people use YouTube and other methods like that to distribute their work, what you have to kind of do is work within that framework, okay? I have a TV that has 10-bit color, and I have monitors that have 10-bit color, and some people have monitors that have even more color than that, or less color, or whatever. You need to be able to make it universal. So, one of the ways that you can help with this, if you find that you're having a lot of issues in your animations or your rendering or your composites, is adding some grain. So, let's go to Add Tool. We're going to go to Film, and we're going to go to Film Grain. Now, you could add regular grain, but I'm going to go to Add Film Grain. And we're going to take this, we're going to plug it right in here, do the same thing as we did before. The left over here is going to have the grain, whereas the right is not. Let's pick an area like this. And let's zoom in over here on the left. And you can see that there is quite a bit of grain there. Let's actually go 200% so we can see this a little bit closer. So you can see here that grain and then this grain here. Now the cool thing about grain is it also adds a little bit of sharpness to your image. So a lot of times I do like to add this in the end just because it does do that. So we can take the size and we can pull it down a little bit so it's not as noticeable. So you can see there, a little bit smooth, and this has a little bit of grain to it. And you can change the strength so you can make it really strong like that if you want to stylize it, but I wouldn't recommend that. Or you can pop it down, but really I would leave it on this default setting because that's going to give you probably the best that you can get here. And then for the roughness here, you can see there it gets, that particular look, and then all the way to the left it gets a different look. Just keep this at default in my opinion. I think it's totally fine. And the size, I think that maybe something like 0.75 might be useful. And we can press play and we can take a look at this, and it might be a little bit slow because it does use the CPU for this. And to be frank, if you're using the free version of DaVinci Resolve when you do rendering, it doesn't use your GPU. It uses your GPU, I believe, while you're doing this sort of stuff in here. But in the final render, it's only going to be using your CPU. So just keep that in mind. It is going to be a little bit slower than you might want, but it is what it is. It's free. So we can see here that here's the fireball up close, and we have the grain applied and then the grain not applied. So to me, looks like it's going pretty good here. So let's take this out, move this right in here. And now we have our final composite, or the final composite of what I'm going to do. Now, you're more than welcome to play around with all this stuff and add some different things if you'd like. There is a prism blur and things like that that you can throw in there and take a look at, and some other things like that. But honestly, I think, for if you're just beginning and this is your first one, this is probably good, because the next thing that we're going to do that really will kind of require you to spend a little bit of time is your coloring. The coloring section of DaVinci Resolve might look a little bit intimidating. So, what I'd like you to do is just sort of like follow along with me and just listen to what I'm kind of saying in general terms. But it is really kind of a playing sort of thing that you're going to need to do here. And might look a little bit different than yours, but you should be on the color wheels here. And over here on the scopes, I'm going to change this to let's use the waveform here. Yeah, let's use the waveform. Okay. And let's go to a different frame. You can see that as it moves, you can see the overall color changing down here on the waveform monitor. So if we go over here, and we could actually change the coloring on this node here, but we're not going to do that. We're going to add another node. So add node corrector. Okay. And we're going to take this, left click and drag, put it into the input, and then take this and put it into the output there. And what we're going to do is we're just going to play around with a couple things. So I'm going to take the contrast here, and I'm actually going to pop this down a little bit because I feel like I'm losing a little bit of my detail with the way that it's done. And I'm just going to move this to 100%. And let's move it like this here. So if I go back up to 1 and I pull it back down, you can see I'm getting a little bit of my detail back in here. And you can see I have a mid detail right here. So if I take this and I pull this up, I can get the mid detail back as well really easily like that. Pretty cool. So the next thing that I want to do here is I want to change the overall contrast using the lift, gamma, and gain. And how I kind of like to do this is I take the gamma and I will pull this down. So if you left click and drag the wheel here, you can see that it's pulling down those values. And then the lift, I'm going to pull this up a little bit. And then the gain, I'm going to pull this up a little bit. And I'm going to pull the saturation down. And don't worry about the color losing some of its luster and stuff like that because we can change the coloring down here. But I'm just kind of looking at the overall contrast in the coloring and the forms that are happening here. And it's probably also best to use the scopes down here as well. You don't want anything too far beyond this here. You don't want it to be completely flat on your blacks, and you don't want your whites to be like completely compressed and situated right up here to the top. So I have a little bit of room to play with here. So I can pull this up a little bit more, kind of like that. And then what I can do is I can take the gamma, the lift, and the gain here, and I can start to pull these around to change the overall coloring of the film. And if I go to fit here, we can see that that's what it looks like right now. And we can move these. If you left click and drag these little points right here, you can move the coloring. So you can see I brought that orange back in. And if I take the gamma and I'm like, oh, this feels warm, let's cool this off a little bit. If I pull this down, you can see that's now cooling the film. Okay, so if you see that right there, if I click this little arrow, it will reset that position. You can see that it brought it back up and it's a little bit warm, right? So if I take this, left click and drag, pull it down, I can cool that off just like that. And let's pull this up a little bit more, maybe like that there. And the lift, I can then change this as well. Now, one thing that you can do to check out how your colors are coming along is change this waveform here, the scopes, change that to the vector scope, and it basically shows where everything is being pulled around. So you see here it says, it's really hard to see on probably the screen, but it says Y for yellow, R for red, M for magenta, B for blue, C for cyan, and then G for green. So whatever's on your screen here, whatever is up here, it will be reflected down here. So if I pull this way up here like this, you can see it's pulling the vector scope in that direction of the red and the yellow. And if I pull it down this way, you can see how it's changing the overall coloring. And from what I understand, a lot of people really like orange and cyan as far as complementaries. So that's why the cyan is on this opposite side and then the yellow and the orange is up here. So if we pulled this down like, this, we're adding more cyan and it looks like a really neat sort of like um, sci-fi burst of fire or something when I start to like pull these around in these different directions, right? So you might want to be a little bit careful unless you're going for something that's stylized, you might want to do something like that, but most of the time we want to keep things a little bit more neutralized. So having stuff a little bit into those different areas might be just what you want. This is the sort of area that it does take a little bit of practice and a little bit of time to see what is going to work for your project and what the overall contrast and coloring and everything should be for your final video. Okay? So I think that's pretty good. We're going to leave it as that for now, but I do recommend that you spend some time doing this. And what you can do is you can turn it on and off over here on the right by clicking the little button. See where it says 02? Left clicking that on and off will turn on and off our coloring effects. So you can see there, here's our fireball. It looks like that, kind of bland or whatever. And then we turn on the recoloring and it looks much more neutralized and a lot better. So let's go over to the Deliver tab and let's just do some basic stuff here. So we're just going to keep this on custom. File name, we're just going to call this Fireball Toot Vid, and I'll call this V1. And location, I already have a location for this, so I'm going to put it here. So you can copy and paste that there. And for the video here, we're going to have it be set to a QuickTime. You could do an MP4 if you'd like, but we're going to do a QuickTime. We're going to do an H.264. We're going to keep it 1920 by 1080. And for the frame rate, a lot of people don't know this, but I have this set to 24 because animations are usually done in 24 frames per second. You might have something that's more than that. It just depends on what you're doing. But what you want to do in your final render is you want to render this out in what's called a drop frame. So 23.976, because it will blend frames together. And if you've ever seen a monitor or a video on a monitor where it seems like there's like this weird sort of like when you're watching it, it skips frames. It's because the frame rate was set to something like a solid number, like 24 or 30. And there are drop frames for each of those. It's like 29 point something, and then 59 point something for drop frame for 60 frames. But for 24, it's 23.976. So you want to make sure that you do that. Otherwise, you might see some weird playback stuff when you're watching it on your monitor or on YouTube. Then for the quality, we could just leave it to automatic best. You can put some values in here if you know how to use all that stuff. We're just going to keep it on that. Keyframes, this has to do with the encoding and how it's played back when you're previewing it on a computer or something like that. I don't want to go into too much detail there. And we don't need to really go into advanced settings and stuff like that. So for the audio now, audio, linear PCM, if you do have audio, and then put this to 32-bit, I believe this is the best quality you can get out of the audio, but I don't remember exactly. AAC you could do, but I do notice that sometimes there's some issues with my voice when it's played back online. But anyway, we don't have any audio in this, so let's just keep this here to the video settings here, and we're going to click Add to Render Queue. Now, this doesn't just start rendering it. It puts it into, like it says, the render queue. So you can see here, I still have it misspelled here for 4-ball. But anyway, you can see here that it's set here for the job. You can set multiple versions or multiple things for your job. Let's go ahead and save this project, and let's render. And because it was already pretty much buffered out in the video, you notice that it went right through and it was pretty fast when it rendered. So if it is buffered, it will just render out what's buffered. The only thing about that is sometimes you might run into an issue where there are some frames that are buffered incorrectly, and in your final render, you'll get some weird blips and stuff like that. If that ever happens, save your project, close it down, and open it back up, and it should and then re-render that, and you shouldn't have that issue anymore. So just FYI, I did run into that before, and that is how you resolve that issue. So let's go here, take a look. Here's our video, and here it is playing back perfectly fine. And we don't have any crazy JPEGing or anything like that, and it looks pretty good. I'm also not seeing a whole lot of banding, which you can see sometimes at the edges of the glow map. I do see a little bit of it, but I also have this blown up to 4K when it's a 1920 by 1080, so it'll mostly be seen at this size. So hopefully that banding won't show up. But if you do see it, it's a perfect example of why you do want to add some grain to your video or your animation before you do your final publishing. So that's going to be it for this tutorial. Hopefully you learned something. I know this was a lot of information to throw at you. If you have any questions or you get lost or anything like that, please leave a comment or a question down below in the comments section. And you can jump onto the Discord server and ask your questions there. And if I am available, I will answer your question as quickly. Thanks so much, and I will see you all next time on DJ Tutorials.